Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. We have a great interview today. Nabeel Mahmood is our guest. Nabeel was our second ever guest on the show, and it's fantastic to have him back on. Nabeel called in from his home in Paradise in the great state of Hawaii, so at one point you'll hear something that kind of sounds like a loud klaxon going off. It's actually just a bird. I conducted the interview from the Data Center Dynamics show at the Marriot Marquis in New York. So there's a good chance that if you're listening to this podcast, you were there. So you'll hear some chatter in the background, so that might be you. I find Nabeel so interesting. Being an entrepreneur, he's got a ton of new ventures that he's working on, including one that we mostly focused on today, which is a company called Querai. And it's spelled Querai. So it's like investigating things with AI. What they're doing is they're using AI to improve the performance of monitoring software. And they're starting specifically with batteries, which I think is a great place to start. It's so often just conceived of as part of the UPS system, when really there are these unique challenges with batteries and completely separate requirements and specifications from the UPS itself. We also talk about the IDCA, the International Data Center Authority, where he sits on the Technical Standards Committee. For those of you who don't know, IDCA is a standards body that is attempting to bridge some of the gaps between what ISO and Uptime and TIA and some other great agencies are doing. I think that just talking with Nabeel, they're on their way to helping unify the monitoring and controls, especially leveraging things like APIs so that data center software packages talk nicely to each other. It's finally happening. It's only taken like 50 years, but software is actually coming around. Let's go. Nabeel, welcome to Good Data. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be back on the show.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for the last interview that we had with you. It was probably one of our best episodes, at least in terms of the reception that we got. We had a lot of people who really appreciated it. So it was just a pleasure talking with you last time, and I can't wait to get talking with you again. And part of that is that you are an entrepreneur and somebody who does so many different, very interesting things, but you've adopted some new ventures, and I want to dig into all of them. But I think one of the main ones that you wanted to talk about that was data center focused was the battery monitoring systems that you're working with right now. So first of all, what is that system called, and what can you just give the elevator pitch for, and then we'll dig in a little bit deeper to get into the specifics.
Absolutely. So since we last spoke, there's been quite a lot of changes. The name of the company is Querai. It's spelled Querai, like you're running a query with artificial intelligence built into it. So I came up with this idea, and something that we have been actually doing, for several years with my partners, whereby we believe that there has been a significant amount of capital spent in the data center space, right? So, we're looking at 5G, we're looking at cloud computing, so on and so forth. The cost of building the infrastructure has not gone down. We are following the same processes, the same design concept whatsoever that we have been for the last 2 decades or so. So we came up with the idea of, where can we potentially reduce the cost of developing, maintaining a data center? And that came down to the energy storage level. And a part of the idea that helped with that was also risk management, risk mitigation as well, in the power quality, power distribution, and the energy storage level. So at a high level of this organization, a part of the idea is to have real-time information for what's going on into your power quality change, power management change, and energy storage change. On top of that, the vision hereby is to not over-engineer your energy storage and design it to what your real needs are. We want to be able to provide real-time information to the three tiers, is what I call it, in the process. You've got your executive management, you've got your operational team, and you've got your functional team. And we want to bridge that gap of communication that lies there today. So the executives are very interested in the financial part of the equation. The operation teams needs to understand the operational piece whereby they can communicate up the food chain. And they're not necessarily that technical. And a lot of that is lost between technical and operational part of the equation. So we want the technical teams to be engaged as well. Now, there's a lot of other battery management systems available in the marketplace, such as Albert, BTEC, CellWatch, so on and so forth. And they're great tools and resources, and they provide a lot of information, but that information is actually stopping at the technical level. It's not getting to the functional, the operational, and the executive management, whereby they can actually make sense of that data. So we got involved in this project a couple of years ago. We started a pilot project out on the other side of the pond. And we deployed and modified the software for this customer of ours, which we've been deployed for about 2 years now. And it's basically proven that our concepts are functional, they're workable. We have seen roughly about 30% cost reduction in management maintenance. We have increased the life cycle of the batteries by roughly about 30%. We have eliminated, roughly about 18 to 20% of human capital as well. So the long of the short is, what is our value proposition? The value proposition hereby is that you're capable of getting real-time information, and it's going to be in simple layman's term. So every functional area gets to see data and what it means to them. And there's a significant amount of cost savings, and the return of investment is between 12 to 18 months so far, based on our implementations.
One of the things that's most interesting to me about batteries is that it's something that we sort of take for granted. We talk about UPS, but not batteries necessarily. That battery almost becomes part of the UPS system when we think about it. So thinking about the battery itself is something that I think is not on the radar for a lot of data center operators. And I really think that's a failing, because the way that we tend to think about it, at least to me, is that we think about replacing the entire string of batteries instead of really thinking about a cell-by-cell level. And that was something that you had brought up before, that there's an opportunity there to both save costs and improve availability by really taking it down to that cell level. So can you talk about that a little bit, just why there's so much opportunity there?
Absolutely. So what happens when you don't have real-time information? You're basically making a lot of assumptions, right? So one cell can go out, the jar can go out, and you don't have the real-time information. You can't make decisions on a real-time basis. So you are reacting to data that might be a day old, that might be a week old, it could be a month old, it could be 6 months old. And by that time, it's actually caused the damage, whereby it could take the entire string out. So you'd think that you might have 5, 7, 10 minutes of a runtime, but your entire string is out and you don't have that runtime. So what we are saying is that predictive analysis and real-time information is critical to ensure that the battery can last longer. And how are we doing that? We're basically leveraging tools, monitoring tools that people might have in place or not. And we're expanding the capabilities based on that by giving information pertaining to what your temperature is, what the float current is, what the float voltage for each jar at the string level is. We can do discharge analysis and so on and so forth. And that data and those analytics on a real-time basis. Now, if a battery starts to go downhill, or based on data, it says, okay, it's at 70% or 75% of its life, then we are going to potentially go ahead and replace that one asset, not necessarily the entire string. So what's that going to do is actually going to extend the life cycle of the entire investment. So you're replacing one potential bad battery, not the entire string.
Right. And this is a different topic, but the idea to me that this is also somewhat of a green opportunity, just in terms of being able to isolate, let's say it's a VRLA battery that is not a green battery. It's got a lot of volatile chemicals that are somewhat dangerous and also just not good for the environment. And if you can identify those bad cells and pluck them out before they cause damage to the rest of the string, and you're not replacing all the batteries all the time, you're replacing the ones that are causing issues, then you're actually reducing some of that sort of effluent of problematic materials out of the data center. There's so few things that come out of a data center that are actually materials. So batteries is one of the primary ones that is actually an environmental hazard. So that's just something that I think is really interesting and a real opportunity from a green perspective. I think most of the time in most data centers these days, I see the VRL8 batteries. We still see some of the big lead acid jars. And right now, we're starting to see a lot more of the lithium batteries. So I was wondering if there's some opportunity there with the lithium and some of the thermal runaway issues that might happen that people are kind of scared of, if there's much that you think is open to that kind of battery monitoring as well.
Absolutely. I mean, our initial focus is going to be on the lead acid and VRLA batteries. I believe lithium is still very, very young. The market has got to be built up for it. We really don't know, first of all, how much lithium is actually available out there.
Right.
And, that's a controversial discussion in itself.
And how much is it being used just in cell phones? And I mean, there's so much demand for it. The prices are bound to go up sometime.
Exactly. So there's certainly a market out there. There's certainly an opportunity out there for that as well. But I believe as it stands today, our focus as an organization initially is going to be on VRLA and lead acid battery. I mean, that market by itself is fairly large. And a part of the vision is to, like you said, to reduce that chemical footprint, that lead footprint. I mean, how do we dispose of these batteries from the data centers, like you said earlier? So we want to make sure that, in some way, form, or shape, that there is a little bit of the green initiative whereby we are not hurting the earth, right? Just for the insurance that our data center is going to be up and running.
So how much of the Querai solution is software-based and how much of it is actually a hardware solution? You said that you interface with other sensors and things like that, but how much of this solution is actually software and predictive analysis?
So as an organization for us, I mean, what we do or what we will be providing pertaining to our services and our solution, we are going to be about 100% software-based. At this point in time, don't really have any intentions whatsoever of getting into the hardware business. I would not say no to it, but I believe that there is plenty of good tools available out there whereby we can actually partner up with them in a lot of cases, leverage APIs and whatnot to help with the data mining. Our focus is more going to be around data mining and ensuring that we are able to help with predictive analysis and real-time analytics.
Well, that is one of the most difficult things, really. At this point, there are a lot of data lakes out there that you really need to get accurate, actionable information from. So, I don't know if it's machine learning or anything like that, but using good, well-managed data to leverage into something that is actionable is probably one of the hardest things. So if you crack that nut, it really is a huge opportunity. Is that sort of where you're at, is making that actionable intelligence out of existing data?
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of tell people that what the business that we are in is what we support the greatest applications. We support the greatest technology, right? We provide the foundation for RPA, robotic process automation. We provide the foundation for machine learning. We provide the foundation for artificial intelligence. And if you look at any of those technologies and any of those platforms, I mean, what is it driven on? It's basically really driven on data. I mean, data is actually really helping drive RPA processes. It's driving machine learning. It's driving AI. Okay.
Right.
But we don't eat our own dog food. Being in the industry, we don't eat our own dog food. And that's a part of the challenge. So the good news, however, is that there's plenty of information available. There's plenty of deployments across the world for some of these tools that I talked about earlier, but there is no uniformity. There is a lack of communication. There's a lack of understanding between all these tiers. When I actually started my career in this industry, one of the things, and I still look back at it and laugh at it sort of, that I was told IT and facilities don't like each other. They don't like talking to each other. They're not on the same page.
Right.
Okay. 2 decades later, where do we stand? We are at square one. The same challenge exists.
Right.
Okay. Now, things have actually changed a little bit. And the reason for that is before, data centers, data itself was considered necessarily evil. We have to have it. Okay. I call it used to be the L in a P&L statement. It was a cost center. We're not making any money out of it.
Right.
Culture has changed. So it's about business continuity. It's about industry leadership. It's about technology innovation, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of interest from the executive management and the ownerships of the company. There's a lot of venture capital money that's coming in. There's a lot of involvement from, the financial institutions, the finance guys, so on and so forth. So of course, it's actually sparked a level of interest, but they don't know technology. They don't understand the basics. And on top of that, they are not able to communicate or comprehend what the facility guys are telling them or the IT guys are telling them. So you've got another layer, right? So what we envision is to simplify that process whereby facilities, IT, and the executive management can look at the same data and make sense of it. So they can be sitting across from each other in a conference room, speaking 3 different languages, but at the end of the day, the results are consistent across the board, and they're able to communicate back and forth.
The API ecosystem has improved so much that I don't think anybody was talking about APIs in the facility space 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. That software was made to have an integration with another specific software package, and it was all kind of had NDAs that had to be passed back and forth that would take forever to actually implement. And then by the time it was implemented, the software itself was out of date. So at this point, we've gotten past that, it seems, or hopefully we have, that now there are APIs that are available that somebody who is a smaller company could get access to a Schneider or a Nlight type of software on the back end, and can make that actually a functional integration with a lot less work and without those huge back end agreements. So I think that is one of the things that's really going to bridge that gap, is the ability for the data center infrastructure itself to now talk outwards in a way that's actionable. Is that something that you're feeling? Like, it seems like that API ecosystem has improved, and that really is one of the reasons why this software could make sense, or does make sense, is that is now available when it wasn't.
Absolutely. So, I'm not sure if we actually talked about this or not, but I actually am involved with IDCA as well, which is the International Data Center Authority. And a part of the premise is basically to develop these standards. And I believe we're heading in the right direction as an industry, whereby, as you said, that the APIs are a lot more friendlier now. They're functional. So the level of standardization has actually driven that behavior. And we've made the first positive step, and there's still quite a lot that needs to be done. But as we define those standards on a global basis and people start following them, more and more of this is going to happen, and it will start making a lot more sense to all of us.
So getting even deeper into that, because I think that not just batteries, but there's so much opportunity in the whole marketplace to create a larger understanding of the data center facility, not just batteries, but UPSs, generators, so that I love the idea that at some point we're going to have an integration between, say, your battery monitoring and orchestration software like Kubernetes, so that if there's a problem with that battery, Kubernetes is going to know about it and will be able to shift loads appropriately. That is such a game changer to me.
Absolutely.
And it is, is that sort of like, is that where you see the whole model going, is that it actually does talk to the software level as well?
Absolutely. I believe, the direction that we want to take it into is that it becomes more of a utility model. Okay. So you looked at your Southern California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, so far and so on, any of the utility companies. Why can't energy storage fall under that same model as well, whereby if one site is going down and you have access storage of energy, that you can move it to another site. So I do believe eventually we'll get to that point.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back on Good Data. Today's episode is brought to you by Green Lane Design. Green Lane has been designing, engineering, and building critical facilities for over 10 years, including major enterprise customers as well as co-location facilities. GLD has designed and developed an integrated stack of design disciplines. If you would be interested in a free assessment, go to greenlanedesign.com, click on Contact, and mention the podcast. And we're back. So what are some of the other data center assets that you think there are the best opportunities in? I mean, I think batteries, because it is sort of undervalued, is a real opportunity. But do you see moving on with other actionable intelligence engines to other assets as well?
So one of the other things that we're looking at to add value to it is work order management, battery replacement management, warranty management, so on and so forth, right? So when the batteries come in, you've got, let's say, 10-year life cycle of the battery, whatever the case might be. Battery has an issue. Now, if you've got all this data, right, battery starts swelling up, the battery is replaced. Now you're fighting against, a warranty claim, so on and so forth. You're wasting a lot of time. So we've got these analytics and real-time information that's actually kept in a repository. So the issue arises that automatically will generate a work order ticket, right? So now whoever is responsible for that will get the notification, will issue a work order whereby the battery is going to be decommissioned, a new battery is going to be installed, whatever protocols they follow with the downtime and whatnot, it's going to be followed. The battery is sent over to the manufacturer, the claim is filed with all the relevant information. So we're making that process easy on the back end as well. So you've got the entire life cycle of the battery, right? So you will have your inventory management with barcoding and scanning. So every time you're doing PMs on it or whatever the case might be, you've got that information in your inventory management system. And then the entire history of the battery, wherever the replacement happened, you're actually keeping real-time information of an asset that's been disposed of, how was it disposed of, what the process was, the entire chain of command. Now going back to your question, where are other opportunities? So I believe there's opportunities in cooling the space as well, right? In a lot of cases, we've got too much air conditioning, too much cooling into the data center. Do we need that? Not necessarily. So there's certainly more opportunity in that space.
And also, predictive analytics that can show leading indicators for equipment failure. So battery, there are a lot of opportunities there because we know certain things about voltages in batteries. Mm-hmm. But in a crack unit, not to say that people are necessarily putting in a lot of crack units these days, but there might be a belt slipping or something that could be an available data point for that kind of analytics too. So I get real excited about that sort of stuff. I know that some of your background is in enterprise resource planning. So some of the inventory management and it all kind of crosses over. Is that why some of that goes into your methodology? And maybe even before we start, can you talk about what ERP is and why that, how that served in the data center?
Absolutely. So ERP is enterprise resource planning. It's basically a software that's used across multiple facets in an organization. So, for instance, sales, manufacturing, finance, scheduling, so on and so forth. It's basically a mothership of running a business. So everybody's speaking, it's a single pane of glass, everybody's speaking the same language, all of your users enter data pertaining to their jobs and job descriptions. That data comes in and makes sense to different business unit managers and eventually the owners and the shareholders of the company. So our methodology is basically the same, right? There's no core repository of the information. There's so many different systems to manage so many different business elements in the data center. So we're bringing that ERP mindset whereby we want to create a single pane of glass. So different users or different skill sets, different levels, different functions can all be on the same page.
That does seem to be one of our real pain points with data centers, is that the financial people have a very, very hard time figuring out what the actual requirements are for any given system, because it's so opaque and it's so difficult to really see into the insights in the data center. We've seen so many people who will overspend. There's thousands of VMs that are running, not doing anything. Maybe not in a given organization, but we've seen definitely places where there is just a lot of waste there. And to be able to cross all those boundaries in a single pane of glass is still very hard. But it's something we're starting to see more availability on. And I think that the sort of CFO is the one who really needs to see it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you a good example. I mean, I've talked to a few of my friends in the industry, and that was actually one of the reasons why I made this big transition in my life over the last 6 months. Talked to a few of my friends, and one of the things that I learned from them is like, okay, so every 4 years or 5 years, they've got targeted they're going to replace all these batteries in the data center. They don't know they're good or bad. So
Right.
You're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars in replacing these assets, whereby you probably could get another 2, 3, 4, 5 years out of them.
Right.
But that's a standard policy that was defined a decade ago by some engineer that wanted to make sure that he or she doesn't lose their job. Now, things have actually changed over the years. We did not have all this intelligence into the system of the data points. We did what we were told or what we learned, but experience has shown that if you manage properly, you can actually extend the life cycle of a battery or any of those assets for that matter.
So how much do you see it seems like the facilities people don't necessarily buy into the financial issues. Is that something that you get pushback from the people who are feet on the ground, or is this something that kind of comes down from the C-level down? Like, who is your customer necessarily?
Well, I mean, our customer is going to be the three functional areas that I talked about: the C-level, the operational, and the technical folks. One of the reasons why there is that gap is that how are you going to hold somebody accountable if you cannot define and understand their KPIs?
Right.
So I'm a data center manager, right? I'm going to extend the battery life cycle by 25%, right? Because let's just assume for the sake of conversation, it was planned to be 4 years. I get 1 more year. My battery replacement is roughly about $4 million, okay? So if I've extended the life cycle of the battery set, I've actually basically, helped the company with about $1 million in savings.
Right.
Right? What's my KPI? How am I to justify, or what did I do correctly justify that I made the right decision? Okay. There has been that gap. So we are actually developing those metrics whereby, you can have that conversation at the same level, whether financial or technical, but there is an understanding. Guys, if I do these, if I take these measures and extend the life cycle of the battery or any of these assets in the environment, I should have some KPIs. So there's an incentive on both ends of the picture.
That's actually, in my experience with attempting to develop KPIs, it's very difficult to get good, actionable KPIs that extend to the people who need to be held accountable. So in your experience, I mean, you've been a C-level type person. Who would you hold accountable for the spend versus the? I mean, this is almost not software related. I'm just wondering personally, who would you hold responsible for that bridging that gap for the spend versus the uptime, which is usually the KPI for a data center person?
Correct. So I mean, that needs to come from both the parties. The C-level folks, I mean, what are we looking at, right? I mean, okay, so I'm looking for uptime. Okay. I'm looking for efficiencies. I'm looking for cost reduction. If I can translate that into a technical KPI whereby there's a financial impact to it, and there's an understanding from those technical folks, I believe you can create a common ground of understanding and developing those KPIs. I mean, of course, the KPIs are going to come in from the ownership or the C-level folks, but having these data points and having basically, I'll call it the data center translator, right, in a way, whereby what Nabeel is doing makes sense to what Drew is doing and other folks in the organization, and that there's a relevance to it. There's an associating point to it. As long as we can understand each other, as long as we can understand each other's languages, I believe those KPIs could be developed fairly easy.
It makes sense, I think, the most if you can integrate all the information, which I have found, and I've worked with a number of data center infrastructure management softwares, and it's not easy for most people. That
absolutely, I get it. I mean, that's going to be a part of the services that Querai is going to have to provide.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I am not afraid of taking any challenges. Or challenge for that matter, because if it was easy, everybody would be doing
it. Yeah, that's part of the interesting mix of disciplines that you have to work through, is getting the software right and also the buy-in from the C-level, the ops people, and the technical people. It's not many people who can cut through all of those pieces.
Exactly.
So getting back to sort of ERP and the integration and getting to a single pane of glass, which is definitely easier said than done, because I've personally never seen a single pane of IT glass before. And now that things are so fragmented between cloud, on-premise, co-location, how much do you have to take the BI software, the data center infrastructure management, all the different pieces? How do you, I guess this isn't necessarily your job, but just I want more insight personally into taking all that and integrating it. Because it still feels like you've got your ERP, you've got your BI, you've got your monitoring, and they still aren't integrated for whatever reason. Do you have a sense of why it's so difficult to make that happen?
Well, so first of all, we've created that fragmentation ourselves, right? DSIM, where has DSIM's core focus been? DSIM's core focus, in my opinion, has been in the data center space, which we call the white space, I believe.
Right.
Right? That's your servers, your storage, your voice, right? So you're looking at your assets, your asset management, your power distribution within that space. But you're forgetting the foundation of it. So you're not looking at your crack units. I mean, you're looking at airflow, potentially in a lot of those cases, but you're not looking at the core of it, the foundation of it. I believe that's where our play is. Now, we've created that segregation because DSIM falls under the IT role. What we're trying to do falls under the facilities role. But at some point in time, over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to have to start coming closer and together and create that uniformity. There has to be a starting point. I mean, our starting point is that the facilities have not been given the attention, and or they actually do not potentially want to get into that space because of the fear factor that IT is going to take over. And they also believe, I mean, hey, personally, they also believe that IT does not have necessarily the understanding of power quality, power distribution, air quality, air distribution, so on and so forth. So there is that gap, and there has to be a starting point. And I believe what we're trying to do here is to bridge that and get it to as close as possible. There isn't a solution in my research or experience that is that uniform platform that exists today.
Right.
Will there be one in the future? Absolutely. But we have to learn from our experiences, really. I mean, what we preach everybody else in the world about RPA, machine learning, artificial intelligence, we need to start bringing that back into our core practice.
Right. That, to me, that's the, $100 billion question is how do you manage the entire thing? And, right now I'm at the Data Center Dynamics conference in New York and seeing a lot of different software vendors attempting to bridge that gap. And I think a lot of it is going to be coming down to everybody's talking about APIs, which the last time I was here, nobody even said the word API. So the idea of interoperability between systems is finally coming from the 80s, which is, the old MIBs and everything that was part of the existing infrastructure, is finally getting into the 2010s.
Exactly.
So it is very, it's heartening. It feels like good things are going to happen soon, that we're actually talking in terms of what programming has been for the last 10 years, if not more. Is the biggest difficulty that it is these large players, not necessarily to call out names, but that they have always put a lot of money into developing proprietary, well, I guess I'll just say, for instances, Vertiv, Liebert, Schneider, these are large companies that develop their own software. And they held on to it really tightly and wanted to own the whole thing. I think part of the problem, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that doesn't work with software. is that
Absolutely.
Sort of, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I would not blame the Vertivs, the Eatons, the Schneiders of the world, because you look at other verticals, even in the software business. You look at IBM, Dell, so on and so forth. They're having the same challenges. So we just have to learn from our experiences.
Yeah.
They are opening up quite a bit, like we talked about earlier in the conversation, whereby you don't have to sign those excruciating contracts that take forever to execute, and by the time you get to a point whereby you can actually start working on something, the platform has changed, the software is all. So they are opening up, which is in itself a big progression.
So we kind of skipped over, well, not skipped over, but thinking about the micro data centers and the edge and the inherent complexity of having multiple sites that all have to be monitored, is that part of your frontier to really be touching single rack data centers, remote or hazardous location data centers, with the battery monitoring and all the other types of monitoring that we're talking about?
Yeah, so a part of the vision that we have and why we got really excited about launching Querai is that you can create that level of standardization, right? So what's going to happen with edge computing? It's a much smaller footprint, and it needs to fit like a glove in every environment. 1 million sites that are planned for the US market the next, I think, 3 to 5 years, they need to have a level of standardization, right? Now you've got all these silos, but there's got to be a management platform to get that information and manage it. Somebody was giving me this, and somebody was telling me rather about this, that an autonomous vehicle is probably going to be from site to site, transmitting and receiving about a gigabyte of data every time it drives through, right? So what does that mean? It's going to be a ridiculous amount of sites across the country. That means that we need to cut down the cost of building those sites. That means that we need to not overbuild these sites. That means that there's got to be a uniformity, right? So our platform basically, the way I look at it is that, and you've been in the industry for a long time, Drew, how many times have you actually really seen a data center design from an energy storage perspective at close to the actual planned utilization?
I cannot think of one.
Exactly. Right. So we typically best case scenario, we're planning 50% more than what the actual planned utilization is, because we might overextend ourselves, right? So a part of our strategy here is to get as close as possible to the actual utilization factor. Okay. Because in reality, what is it? You need about 7 seconds to move over to the secondary power. Okay. So it doesn't really matter. Okay. So in actuality, the 7 second really transpires into about 35 to 40 seconds
Right.
before the load transfer over. But still, do we need to design data centers with, an hour of a runtime or 2 hours? No.
Yeah.
I would say let's cut it down because, I've been on the IT side of the house as well. And I know that if I am running a 50,000 square foot site and I even have an hour of a runtime, I cannot shut down every single machine gracefully. So
Right.
I can live with a minute. I can live with 7 minutes. But do I really need an hour? No, I don't. So the idea is to create the level of standardization in the marketplace whereby, okay, let's agree to a number. Is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Whatever the case might be. That you don't need to over design the energy storage. Okay. And then with it being a software and potentially software as a service, then you actually have one centralized area whereby you can access every single site as well. So that's the vision, is to create and the 5G play as well as the hyperscale really actually gets me excited that more and more computing is going to happen. Okay, we want information now. That's the generation that we are. We are an information now generation. We want information now. Okay, what does that mean? That means that there's going to be more data points. There's going to be more data centers for that matter. There's going to be more computing required. Latency is going to become an issue relatively soon here. I mean, when I'm traveling, it feels like 4G and LTE are extremely slow on my mobile device now.
Right.
So I'm going to want more as a user, right? That means that there's more and more build out, but we cannot do so because the market is still very young. And like I was talking about earlier in the conversation, that the financial folks are coming into the space. They want results now. They also feel that the return on their investment is, a lot longer. So how do we reduce that? We can reduce that by changing our design approach. We can reduce that by actually mapping the information and reducing some of these expenses that are not necessarily needed, like over designing an infrastructure. So I believe that there is a play in those two areas of growth that the market is making significant strides.
So I'm interested in what the limits are for ERP monitoring, integration.
Some of the challenges that I do foresee is that this is becoming a utility. Cybersecurity is going to be a concern, and we need to address that later today. We don't need to be reactive down the road. The uniformity platform is going to come eventually. It's not there today. There's, like anything, over the last decade, we have actually seen a lot of consolidation by mergers and acquisitions. That's going to keep on happening, and that's eventually potentially going to create that level of standardization. I don't know the Workdays, the Eatons, the Schneiders of the world could be that power quality utility company. I do not know that.
Yeah.
But that's the play a lot of people are making, a lot of organizations are making. There is going to be consolidation and there's going to be standardization. But my biggest concern, besides the uniformity, would be the foundational part of it, and certainly on the cybersecurity part.
So IDCA is doing some of that work to do the legwork for creating uniformity. Open Compute, I see a lot of excitement about because it's working that way in a different way. How do IDCA and Open Compute work together?
IDCA, again, is very, very open to understanding what the market challenges are and how we can unify that. And Open Compute is, again, around the same lines. Eventually, it's going to be a collaborative effort from these organizations. I believe Open Compute started by Facebook, LinkedIn folks, if
Correct.
I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. So, of course, their charter is funded heavily. They've got the capital and the infusion whereby they can actually go out and do a lot of these testings and whatnot and define those standards. IDCA is making an effort as well. And, my peers across the world are, basically people like myself that are potentially very outspoken and I would say kind of creative thinkers in a way and questioning why are we doing what we're doing. Our experiences combined together based on real-time actually real life information is what's driving the IDCA standards. And I mean, and of course we question each other on our bi-weekly calls.
I think the more standards bodies that can agree on those standards and help guide the larger conversation, I think is great. I think one of the weaker aspects that I see for open compute is the data center, the large scale data center. So they have those specs for the large scale data center, but they really focus on the very small hardware level, the racks, the compute nodes, the storage, all of that stuff. So if there's a interplay there, it feels like IDCA is more working on the larger facility piece, if I understand it.
That is correct. Yeah.
But I like the idea of, all these things kind of talking to each other and having real dialogue around these types of things, because I really feel like it needs to happen. That's why I do this podcast, is that I want people to talk these things through and really think about the effects that we're having on uptime and also the world. I keep hearing different estimates of how much energy use the data center infrastructure is actually part of the global energy use. I've heard 6%. I keep hearing 2%, but we have to be good stewards to that entire equation. So
absolutely. Well, I mean, the way I look at it is that at least we've got some sort of a percentage. I remember when we didn't even know what we were doing. I mean, there was no metric available whatsoever. I mean, PU came into existence and it was like, oh my gosh. So yeah. I mean, it's progress. I mean, we are learning, and that's what's going to make us better.
And it's fantastic that PUE's I was just seeing a statistic that in 2011, PUE average was like 1.86. And in 2018, it was less than one, or about 1.5. And you can easily achieve now with off-the-shelf hardware 1.05. Not easily, I shouldn't say easily, but it is doable to do that. Things are going in the right direction. That's the very good news, I think. So,
absolutely.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Any other things that we didn't touch on that you'd like to touch on?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, what's important, I believe, it's knowledge. The more you know, the better decisions you're going to make. And I mean, that applies into anything and everything that we do as human beings. I mean, a few things that I would like to kind of sort of summarize it was that, why did I get into it is because I am a firm believer, and if we do not change the mindset and keep on doing the same thing over and over again, we should not be expecting different results. So getting into and launching Querai, and this was a project that we had been working on for the last couple of years. The whole idea behind it is that let's make smarter decisions. So let's build processes, let's build that level of intelligence that we talk about and support for a lot of different verticals, but we don't do it for ourselves. And I'm a firm believer in user experience. You make it simple and easy for people, and you make it whereby they can understand. It makes it for a successful implementation and a successful experience. And those are some of the things that I've kind of learned from my personal experiences. I mean, I was actually traveling to Rome, and I had never been to Rome. And not to mention, I actually did not speak Italian whatsoever. People were very hospitable, and my entire travel was actually the best travel experience ever I've had in my life. I used Google Translate. I talked to a lot of Italians using Google Translate, and that was very much so experience driven. It was all UI. So we want to build more on the UI. We want to ensure that we're speaking the same language across the table, and there's that level of uniformity. And Querai really is actually a foundation to it all.
I think in terms of adoption, having that fantastic UI is so important. And also in terms of keeping up with the actual continuation of the product. For somebody to adopt, it has to have a fantastic UI. And for somebody to maintain, it requires fantastic UI or UX. And that's so lacking in so much of the monitoring software. I think one of the biggest frustrations about DCIM and monitoring systems is how difficult it is to use. So if you can crack that nut, that is a huge benefit, I think.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to give it a try. We'll make every effort.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I really want to see what comes out. So I guess we can wrap it up. I really appreciate you talking with us again. I think I just am so interested in how your mind works and where you're going to go from here and integrating all of those pieces. So we'll talk again soon, I hope, and keep looking back and seeing where we're going to go.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on your podcast again. It's certainly been a pleasure, and happy to be a part of your growing podcast and contribute to the data center market.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nabeel.
Very good.
That's our show. You can find Nabeel Mahmood on Twitter at Nabeel Mahmood and on LinkedIn. He's got a website, nabeelmahmood.com. Thanks to our sponsor, Greenlane Design. Go to greenlanedesign.com for more info. I'd like to thank JukeDeck for providing our theme music. For Good Data, I'm Drew Farnsworth. I'll talk to you next time on the podcast.